May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer.
Amen.
Please be seated. Just a notice before we do that, it's the stewards who make sure candles are out for the prayers. I forgot to tell you earlier, we need candles for the prayers, which are, and maybe dawn which are in the nursery, but don't worry, so that's fine. So we need candles for the prayers. We have a very interesting story this morning from Genesis. All stories of the Bible are interesting one way or another, but the Genesis story of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Hagar and Ishmael is a particularly fond or favourite of mine because I think it says something really important. Because we have in the story, just to kind of recap, remind ourselves of what the story is about, or maybe to tell people what the story is about. Abraham has been told in a very ripe old age by God that he will give birth to an heir. He's concerned about it, he's worried about it. And God tells him that your descendants will cover the stars. Be like the stars tonight. Beautiful kind of image. But as he gets older and as Sarah gets older and Sarah has not given birth to anyone, this promise seems like it's not going to be fulfilled. So Sarah and Abraham decide to take it into their own hands and do something which isn't very nice, actually. It isn't very nice at all. Sarah says, let me give you my maid, who is actually an enslaved person, an Egyptian enslaved person by Abraham, and you have sex with her, and she will produce you an heir. And so they do this. And Ishmael is born to Hagar. And we hear also in the story at that time that when she is pregnant, Hagar is badly treated by Sarah, who is getting jealous about Hagar, and so she runs away. What's fascinating about that is that God speaks to Hagar at that point, and that's the first person that God speaks to clearly, directly, in that way, in the Bible. It's a beautiful thing. I think he sends her back to enslavement, which is a really sort of hard thing for us to think and to take in. He sends her back to enslavement. He says, but I will, your child will become a person of a great nation, and you will see that happen. So he gives a promise to Hagar. Very different promise to what he's given to Abraham, but he does give a promise to Hagar about her child. And so then we see here now, in a way, that promise fulfilled. Because that promise is a promise of freedom. It's a promise of freedom to Hagar, it's a promise of freedom to Ishmael. And what happens in this story? We see that because, and I don't know why it says is laughing, is joy, or whatever, what's going on in the context, it's very difficult to kind of work out and imagine. But again, Sarah demands that the child is sent away. Hard thing. To be sent away into the desert. So Abraham, with a heavy heart, sends her away. I mean, one of the things Sarah says, maybe it's about power and wealth, but Sarah says you'll have to divide your wealth between both my child and her child, because he was your firstborn. So maybe it's a power thing, who knows? But anyway, she demands that he send her away. And Abraham, with a heavy heart, asks God, and God promises him that the child will be okay. He packs him up and off they go. And again, what happens? God comes to Hagar, and God provides water. Spring of well comes up to feed the child. God saves him, and says again that your child will have a great nation after. So she's now free. She's now free, she's now liberated. She's no longer enslaved by Abraham. and his family, she is now free. The important thing of this story is there are lots of characters, particularly in this Abraham story in Genesis. Abraham, we are told, is the one who is chosen, and that in his line will the chosen people come. From that comes the Israelites. But we need to be careful when we think about chosenness, what that means. Chosenness by God does not mean that God doesn't care for anybody else. Chosenness by God is a special relationship, yes, but it's a relationship of responsibility. And that is what the people of Israel find out down the line. It's a relationship of responsibility. Chosenness is not, we are God's best children. We are given a task by God to be a light to the nations. That's what the Israelites were given, and that's what also we are given as people of the promise given in Jesus Christ. So it's a task, it's a responsibility, and the world will find us if we don't carry it out. Well, as we learn when we read about the story of the people of Israel, a very self-critical story. We can do with the same level of self-criticism in our text, I think, as Israel have in their text, as the Jewish people have in their text. So chosenness is not about the fact that God only cares for those who are given a special responsibility. Chosenness is that we have that special responsibility. In a sense, we have a burden of responsibility that is also a joy. A calling, and chosenness is a calling, a particular calling by God. We need to hear that. We need to know that the people of Israel were given a calling, and also we as Christians are given a calling. And it's interesting, I think, in the letter to Galatians in Paul this morning, which is a very confusing passage, where he uses the story of Hagar and Sarah as a way of kind of saying, who Christians are and what they're not. People of the way are and what they're not. And sometimes this is read as an anti-Jewish passage. But actually, no, what's going on in the Galatians community is that people are saying, we need to become Jews to become full Christians. The group called the Judaizers. They're telling people they should be circumcised. I don't think I would quite like that as an outcome, I don't know. But so they need to be circumcised if they haven't been circumcised. They're Judaizers. But Paul is saying, no, that's not the point. There are two covenants. The one which has been made with the Jewish people, and the one in which the people of Christ are coming to God as themselves. They don't need to become Jews. And so if you do this, you're misunderstanding it and you're enslaving yourself again to before you have the promise. Because you're denying the promise that has been given you in Jesus Christ. So that's what he means when he's talking, when he uses the story of Hagar and Hagar and Sarah as an allegory for what it fulfills two covenants. And he talks about two covenants. There are two covenants. We are called to be a light to nations, as the Jewish people are called to be a light to nations. We are called to be a light to nations through Christ. And that's why, as I've said before, Paul is so excited as a Pharisee Jew about what's happening, because the promise in the Old Testament is God is coming, God's resurrection, God's new kingdom, God's new way is coming when the Gentiles start coming to the God of Israel through themselves. Not through becoming Jews, but as nations, as peoples coming to, and that's what Christ offers the world. So we need to be careful in two ways. One, we need to be careful about understanding that when we are called, our calling, our chosenness is a responsibility. It doesn't mean God doesn't care for anybody else. Our chosenness is a responsibility. And the story of Hagar and Ishmael shows quite clearly that God has a passionate care for all of his creation and for all of humanity. And so when we think about that sense of calling, we need to think again, what's our calling today? What's our calling in the world of war and hunger, in the world in which climate change is devastating parts of the world? Last week I was at fundraiser after church. I went to a fundraiser down at the local mosque for the Pakistan floods. Those floods are a direct result of climate change. Pakistan, which actually contributes, I think, 0.98 metric, whatever it is, a measurement of what per capita we are causing in terms of CO2 emissions. A tiny contribution to climate change. In comparison to our country, which is nearly 6, Americans, which are nearly 16, China, which is nearly 6, again 7, just a little bit more than us. The countries that have been affected by this are perhaps those countries which are contributing the worst consequences to the situation. And so what's our calling in that context? What's the calling of love in that context? We need to examine, when people are talking about the energy crisis and how are we going to get an energy crisis, you're like, well, we need to be looking at renewables, don't we? Rather than drilling for more gas or drilling for more oil. So these things do impact. This is a calling because it's God's earth. It's God's creation. This is biblical. It's not kind of getting into politics, it's biblical. Well, it's biblical to get into politics, but that's the thing. We need to be thinking about that and challenging our governments and the authorities on that. And so when we think about calling as well, that's the calling to us also as a community, but also to us each individuals. And Abraham received his calling. As in fact, Hagar received differently her calling in Ishmael, as Paul received his calling to spread the gospel to the Gentiles. As those early Gentile communities heard the call of Christ and came to their faith in him. So we in our time are called to be people of God, are called to discover what that means at this time. In our relationship with the earth, and in our relationship with one another, and in our relationship with the wider community. As we come to this Eucharist this morning, as we come each week, we ask God to again show us, to renew, to maybe spark a new sense of what our calling is as a community, and also our calling each individual. When you receive the sacrament, ask yourself, ask God, what are you calling me to at this time and in this moment? As I come before you with all my troubles, with all my concerns, with all my hopes, with all my dreams. What do you want me to do? How do you want me to be a person of God in this world of pain, violence, but also a world of hope, and love, and joy? How do you want me to show the gospel? How do you want me to be a person of Christ this time and in this life?